Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sam Drew with the National Dropout Prevention Center, and I'm here with my co-host and colleague, Marty Duckenfield, also with the center. And we welcome all of you to this first of many monthly radio webcasts brought to you by the National Dropout Prevention Center at Clemson University and in partnership with Clemson Radio Productions and the generous support of Penn Foster.
Welcome to Solutions. We are all excited about this first of many broadcasts that will focus on solutions to the dropout crisis. There's been tremendous interest already from not only across our country, but as internationally as well, and it's kind of exceeded our expectations, so it's a pretty big day for us. If you've come this far and you're hearing our voices, then you have found our website, and I want to point out to you before we get going some of the resources that are there for your future reference and also for the current program. First of all, the website resources that we have on there, including the book that the program is based upon today, shall be there. I also want to draw your attention to the slide presentation, which will be used by our guest today, that you have that up and running and ready to go. But we want you all to be an active part of the program today, and so we are welcoming your questions as you can call them in. We have a toll-free call-in number, and we'll give that to you several times during the program. It's 888-539-8859. And for those of you who are outside the U.S., you may also call us by, unfortunately, not a toll-free number, but it's 864-656-4552. You can begin calling in now or any time during the program. We'll have to put you on hold for a while, but please do try and get your call in, and we'll try to get as many of you online as we can during the broadcast.
And you know, Marty, this is such a great format, the advantages of technology. We're here at Clemson. Our special guest, and we'll meet him in just a moment, is in Ohio. And we have people listening from all over the country, and we've even had some international callers contact us. You know, as we travel around the country talking about dropout prevention, we're finding that our nation is much more aware than really ever before of the dropout issue and the crisis that it presents. We certainly know that dropping out of school is a long process for students. It's not something that happens overnight, and this national dropout crisis didn't happen overnight. Now, the bad news is that there's no quick fix. We know that there are no magic bullets to end it. But the good news is that we know that there are many solutions to this problem, and solutions are what we intend to focus on in this program. Our special guest today, Dr. Stephen Edwards, has built successful solutions to improve student performance and increase graduation rates. During his 16 years as school administrator, as a principal, he was able to reduce dropout from 28% down to 2% in the school where he was administrator. And he's really worked on educational reform efforts and leadership development throughout his 31-year professional career. Steve, welcome, and we're so pleased to have you with us today to talk about the principal's role in dropout prevention.
Sam, thank you. It's good to be here. And hi, Marty. How are you?
I'm doing great, and it's good to hear your voice.
Good, thank you.
Steve, your new monograph, which is published by NDPC, and as Marty said, can be found on the website, and entitled The Principal's Role in Dropout Prevention, 7 Key Principles, has really drawn tremendous interest from across the country. And obviously, you think the principal's role is an all-important one.
Yes, I do, Sam, and I really think the principal plays a pivotal role in public education, and for us to be effective in reducing that dropout rate and impacting those issues that surround that the principal is a pivotal position in doing and seeing that happens.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, as a former principal, I couldn't agree with that more, but we know that our listeners want to have a discussion with you, not so much interested in our opinions. We want to hear their opinions and their interaction with you. We know they have many questions to ask, but would you take some time now, if you would, and tell us a little more about your 7 principles?
Okay, Sam, thanks. I hope folks have their web site up and they have the PowerPoint in front of them, and this is really a very brief overview of these 7 principles. And I surely don't profess to say that this is the be-all, end-all. It's just some points that I think are critical. But let me get started, and I'll take a little time to talk about this. If we can go to the second slide that highlights Principle 1, identifying students early, that would be great. I'm not going to take a lot of time and talk about data and who the dropouts are and so on, but this program is really about solutions, as Sam said in his introduction, and I want to talk about some of those solutions. And I really want to personalize it based on your particular setting. So everything I say, you need to take it and place it in the context of your situation. Although there's some similarities, there are unique aspects to each community, each region of the country, and each specific school. So when we talk about early identification, who are our students that are dropping out of school? Who are those students in your school? What does your data tell you about who's dropping out of school? And when do we identify a student at risk? When do we say that this is an issue? What are the risk factors in your school and community? We know a lot of data and statistics on risk factors nationally, and many of those are going to be very similar to your situation. But getting down to identifying who those kids are, what their risk factors are, what the dynamics are in your community are really important. And as we go through this brief overview, keep in mind that each of these principles are not separate silos, but they're interconnected. And it's almost impossible to talk about one without overlapping into others. And hopefully that'll become evident as we move forward. When you look at the book, you'll see an example of a pyramid of intervention. And I use that pyramid example because I think it's really important to have a systematic approach as we look at identifying kids. What do we currently have in place based on identified risk factors, based on what we know about the kids, the students in our community, that helps us design an effective approach in addressing these challenges as we move forward. So use that as maybe an example. Many of you in your individual schools, communities have similar type of programs or initiatives, but take a look at that as one example that we actually had in our school. I'd like to go on to the next slide, which is principle number 2, closely examining new and existing school policies and procedures. I think sometimes we're our own worst enemy. I think we have, in many cases, set up policies and procedures that create or contribute to the dropout problem. And one example, zero tolerance. I dealt with a principal one time who called me from a school in one of the southern states, and he said that, Steve, in our school, when I came in as principal, we had a list of if A happens, then we do this. If B happens, we do this. C happens, we do this. There's no gray area. Everything was black and white. And I guess maybe it's a factor of age, but as I've gotten older, my gray area has increased significantly because I think there are always options. Let me just go back to that pyramid example that I stated in the last slide, or talked about in the last slide. With that pyramid, there's really no top. I don't believe there's any, there is no, this is where we end, this is where we stop. There's always something else we can do. I think too often we give up too soon when kids take too long. But thinking and looking at the current policies and procedures in your school, and who do they most impact? You go to school, sometimes they don't have a policy for kids who are truant from school. And then if they're truant from school, then what do? They come back to school and they're suspended for their truancy. Well, it really doesn't make much sense. Recently, I wrote a brief article, I guess, in the National Dropout Prevention Center newsletter on policies, and some of you might take a look and reference that. But what data do we have on the impact of some of the policies and procedures we have in place on some of our subpopulations? Really disaggregating that data and looking at who's being impacted by our policies and procedures, I think, is critically important. And is there some even minor modifications that we could make in some of these policies and procedures that would really have a positive impact on some of those most vulnerable students? I think it's a real important thing to take a look at. I think many times these policies and procedures are not looked at through the lens of some of those children who are most at risk. Let's go on to the next slide. Principle number 3, building strong community partnerships and support, and personalizing your school, of course. Now, who are those key agencies, organizations, or businesses that we need to bring in and engage in this process? And how do we create win-win partnerships? I'll just give you a couple examples that are probably highlighted in the book. We had a high incidence of students who were involved in the criminal justice system, and therefore, through a series of meetings and developing relationships with the regional coordinator for probation, we established probation office in our school for the probation officers and put all of our students who had a probation officer under 1 or 2 probation officers to really focus that attention on those kids. Our goal was to reduce recidivism rates and keep kids in school. Another thing that we did is I established a liaison to our juvenile correctional facility. So the moment a child was incarcerated, we began to think about how we design a reentry plan for that child. In addition, we created office space for DCF, Department of Children and Families. We had a bank in our school where our kids actually ran the bank. But these were win-win situations because if we can work collaboratively with key agencies within the community, think about those key agencies that are in your community that would add value to helping you address and meet the needs of those most vulnerable kids. Are they engaged in the process? Are they part of the group within your school, within your community, or are they seen as sometimes a separate entity operating as a group that's somewhat removed from the school operation? I found as we put these groups within the school, we created a higher level of collaboration, relationship building, and of course trust, and that trust allowed us to better be able to meet the needs of these kids from a more comprehensive approach. Personalizing a school, I'm a big fan of teaming and looping and having adults in the lives of children for extended periods of time. Our traditional high school models and even middle school models many times have children engage with adults 45 minutes or maybe 90 minutes a day, but that may be only for a semester, and there does not create the level of ownership that I believe needs to take place to help kids really develop those strong relationships. We know there's a whole lot of research behind, some research done by the Journal of the American Medical Association on mental health issues with children, talks about the connectedness to family members and obviously connectedness to school-based personnel for children to be successful in school and not be engaged in behaviors that are detrimental to their well-being. Let's go on to the next slide. Principle 4, reduce social isolation. I think what's really important here is that do our most vulnerable students get exposed to the same opportunities that the top students get, or that even our own children get personally. I think of the experiences that my own children have had in their lives that have given them tremendous exposure to all kinds of situations. But in many cases, some of our most vulnerable kids don't get that. I remember when I came to school in an urban setting where I was a principal, where I asked where kids went on field trips, and I said, well, these kids, these most vulnerable kids, we take them to the prison, so they'll get to see what's going to happen if they keep doing what they're doing. Well, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you take kids to prison, you've really sent them a clear message as to this is maybe where you'll be, as opposed to saying, let's take these kids to the places where we take the top kids. Why shouldn't those opportunities be available to all children? I also think about the connections to the business community and how we create opportunities for kids to participate in internships and shadowing opportunities. And I know that many of these things exist in many of your schools and in schools across the country. But the more we can expand these opportunities and the more we can create those for populations that sometimes I think are overlooked. Another piece that I think is important is the opportunity to serve, to give back to the community. We have to help structure this for kids so they get to see the importance of giving back to the community. They're part of something bigger. A program that we had a number of years ago that it was pretty unique, I think. It was called Drive-By Rakings. And instead of kids doing detentions or being in school suspension, children could participate in drive-by rakings, where a staff member at the school would take 3 or 4 kids, and we would go with 3 or 4 rakes and rake the lawns in the fall of some of the senior citizens or people around the school and in the neighborhoods. It was a community service. It was just a great way to get kids engaged and give back to the community. And these people would come out and thank them. And it really made them feel special and maybe understand that they're part of something bigger. Let's go on to the next slide. I know this is very, very quick, but we want to make sure that we get to your questions and your comments, because I hope that we have plenty of time to have that type of interaction. Principle 5 talks about managing student transitions. And transitions, as we well know, occur very often in a child's life, pre-K through 12. Just transition from year to year in school, from level to level, from elementary to middle to high school, and even transitions throughout the day, going from one period to the next. And being proactive with transitions, how do we assist and design programs and initiatives to help our most vulnerable students, all students of course too, but our most vulnerable students deal with those transitions? Many of these kids have had significant instability in their lives, and we have these transitions that take place that contribute to that change that takes place, and helping them learn how to work through, manage that change, I think is really important. So being proactive and getting them prepared for those changes. We know that just going from one class to the next class for a child can be a difficult experience for some kids. So looking at transitions from all aspects of that child's life. Sometimes, too, we go back to policies and procedures, or maybe it's more a structural piece. In some districts, I've seen examples of, kids will go in a district, all kids in kindergarten go to the same school, bang. Then they branch off and go to a 1 through 3 school, and a 4-5 school, and a grade 6 school, and then a 7-8 school, and then a 9-12 school. And that's a real example. Think of the number of transitions, and we go back to getting to know our kids. You don't get to know the kids with any depth when you have them for very short periods of time. Let's go on to our next slide. Principle 6, creating options and implement creative interventions. We have to think both about options, academic and non-academic options. And we think about the importance of a whole menu of opportunities for kids and how we assess kids, and looking for small wins, understanding that each individual child's dynamic, and being able to build off where they're at. I really think as we continue to move forward in public education, we're moving from a one-size-fits-all to much more of a individualized plan for kids. And I see the concept of an IEP for our special education students. And I envision someday every child will have an IEP. Every child will have their own individual growth plan, that they will participate in designing that plan and managing and monitoring that plan, and working collaboratively with adults in moving forward and making progress on that plan. Thinking about looking at extending the time for students to complete requirements. Why does a child have to graduate from high school in 4 years? Why does it have to be a 9 through 12 or 10 through 12 program? Probably many of us on the program today didn't finish college in 4 years. We took more time. I look at the flexibility with graduate programs, having taught in a couple of universities, and looking at how the flexibility has been put into complete graduate programs, weekend programs, online programs, combinations of online in-class programs, all those different things really to meet the needs of the customer. And I think we need to look at our students as customers and how we best meet their needs. So I come back to that concept of a menu of options. The other piece is, of course, identifying a child's strengths early and also their needs, and how do we help meet those needs based on each child's individual circumstances. So it's very time-consuming to look at individual plans for each child, but you start to think about, what's the alternative? If we don't look at it from that perspective, then I believe we'll continue to get what we get. Let's go on to the next slide. Principle 7, building parent and family relationships. All of our kids come from somewhere, and they've got a history, and as we well know, often there's a history in their families of parents and siblings who have not been successful in school. So we need to recognize that, understand that, and appreciate that. I think what's really important, though, is not to hold kids accountable for the failings of their parents. I think far too often, especially even in the early grades, in the primary grades, kids are held responsible for the failings of their parents. The child doesn't get to school, and we discipline the child at school because they didn't get there, when really at 6, 7, 8 years old, the responsibility lies on the parents. So engaging the parent in that process. I talk about the idea of over-communicating. I don't think we can communicate with parents enough, but I think often we need to communicate with them on their turf. We need to go home visits, those types of things, outreach into the community, help them get resources they need. I realize that public education has now become something where we are trying to meet the needs of all people in all situations, and that's the hand we've been dealt, so I believe we have to play it. But being proactive, thinking about the transitions, getting to know parents before their child gets to the school, understanding who the students are who are going to be most vulnerable, and understanding the connection to their parents is critical. Let's go on to the next slide. And I know this is very quick, but we want to, again, get to your questions. In developing a plan, I think it's so important to assess where you are and what do you have in place, what's working, what do you accept as evidence that what you have in place is making a difference. And we talk about the concept, Michael Fullen talks about the implementation dip. Many times we'll put an initiative in place and we may not see immediate results, so we abandoned it. It takes time for some initiatives to work, but determine from the beginning how you're going to assess if an initiative, a program, an activity, whatever it may be, is going to be successful. What are you going to use as key measures to determine that? And be data-driven and look at the multiple sources of data. The work of Victoria Bernhardt, I think, is really important to take a look at. If you haven't taken an opportunity to take a look at that, it's worthwhile. She talks about 4 sources of data, and where those 4 pieces of data overlap, we get the richest information. She talks about data based on demographics, perceptions, student achievement, whether that be academic or behavioral, and also school processes, those initiatives, those programs we have in place. Far too often, I think what happens is we have no problem adding more programs, but we don't necessarily do a real good job of assessing to determine whether those programs are being effective and really meeting the needs of the specific population we've designed them for. Another bullet on there is be honest with yourself in your school and your community. I travel places all the time where they say, "Oh, we don't have a gang problem here," when there are clearly gang problems. We don't have a dropout problem here, because of course it comes back to how you define a dropout, and of course that's a question that's a huge question. I'm not going to address that right now. You have to decide within your own school, your own community, your own district what you're going to use as your definition of a dropout, because there are a whole lot of kids come to school every day who in essence have dropped out, but they still appear every day, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. Next slide, implementing the 7 principles. You can't try to do everything at once. In the back of the monograph, there's some suggestions based on these 7 principles, and many of these are a little cost, no cost, or are very reasonable to put in place. But look at multiple phases. How can we tweak or adjust what we already have in place? But it's really important. We can't do everything at once, but that's why it's so critical to know what you are and know what you have in place and see what's working. I alluded to this earlier, starting with evaluation plan in mind. What are you going to use to determine your measure of success? and keep in mind the core values of your staff. Sometimes many of these challenges around the dropout prevention issue are fact that it's really not necessarily in some cases a core belief that kids need to be in school. You'll deal with individuals who really believe, well, that's their choice. They've made this decision. It's always interesting to me that the United Nations has redefined youth up to age 25. They've done that for a reason. This notion, at least from my perspective, that, well, you're 18 now, you should have it figured out is a bit unrealistic. I'm moving farther along into my 50s, and I haven't got it figured out yet. So maybe we should redefine youth to the half-century mark or beyond. But I think it's really important to understand that regardless of the age of the child, developmentally, there are certain stages, needs based on kids at different points developmentally, but also that age doesn't mean that you know this or are able to do that. Kids come to school and they've had experiences, but their experiences may not be consistent with our experiences, and sometimes I think we teach or instruct or lead based on our own life experiences, not necessarily the life experiences of our kids. So with that said, I'm going to stop and let Sam pick it up.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, for that overview. And some of us, I'll have to admit, are beyond the 50s and still don't have it figured out. But well, there's so much embedded in these 7 principles, and so little time to really cover this thoroughly. We want to move right into our audience questions and get them involved. I know they have many things on their mind coming from the work they did before this broadcast and what you've just said. And I know we have several callers on the line now.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, and we're looking forward to hearing from all of you now. This is your opportunity to talk with Dr. Edwards. I'm going to remind you of the phone number, and then we'll take our first caller. It's 888-539-8859, toll free. And out of the U.S., 864-656-4552. Now, Cecilia from Raleigh, you've been holding on for a really long time, but we welcome you as our first guest on Solutions, and we'd love to hear your comments or your questions for Dr. Edwards.
Thank you. Again, my name is Cecilia Rollins, and I represent Communities and Schools of North Carolina. We're a dropout prevention program. And my question is related to Principle 2 regarding school policies and procedures. As a former elementary school principal, I just recently retired in December as an elementary school principal. And I was very concerned about the impact of No Child Left Behind and the focus on school and grade retention. And our staff did lots of research, and we had a difficult time finding research that supported grade level retention, because that shows that most of the research, or all of the research, shows that children may have some very, very immediate gains, but down the road, middle school, high school, those students who are retained in elementary school are highly likely to drop out of high school. And I'd like to hear what Dr. Edwards has to say about that.
Well, Cecilia, thank you for calling in. And are you Wake County?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I was just there a couple weeks ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And Bill Milliken, I know Bill Milliken personally, head of Communities and Schools, and I've done a lot of work with them over the years. But well, you touched a real nerve with me on the retention piece, because I was retained in school. I was retained in 4th grade, well, for a whole lot of reasons. One was I couldn't read, and I felt the lifelong scars, truly, of being retained in school. I think the problem with retention is all we do is for many kids, it's just a repeat of what we've already done. And for me, retention is the failings of the school, not the failings of the child.
Right.
It's the failings of the people who are working with that child, because where have we intervened prior to that? What have we put in place to help that child address or help address the deficits that child has? And we know what happens, Cecilia, is it gets compounded over time. If, and I'm not just saying pass people on, because we pass them on without the skills. That's why we need common means of assessing students to ensure that kids have the skills they need to be successful, whether they're behavioral or academic skills. Too often I think we rely on grades and say, well, what does a B mean? What does an A mean? What does an F mean? It becomes immaterial. I think in many cases grades are immaterial, but that's a deciding factor, and sometimes on how a child is promoted or retained in school. So I don't want to belabor the point because there's other callers, but I feel very strongly that retention is not the answer. Early intervention is the answer,
right, and
that we've got to connect the dots from teacher to teacher to teacher, from agency to agency, from department to department. So it's a comprehensive approach to meet each individual child's needs.
Right. I so agree with you, and I'd love to talk to you more, but I know I agree I can't hog all the time, but I have so many thoughts about this, and I appreciate your thoughts about it. Thank you.
Well, I'll be back in Wake County next month. Maybe I'll see you there.
Will that be posted online somewhere where we can see that?
If you contact the center, they can tell you probably when I'm going to be there.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia, for your call. I want to remind the others who are listening that our phone lines are open, and it's 888-539-8859, toll-free, and then 864-656-4552 for outside the U.S. We have a call from Laurence from Little Rock, Arkansas. Welcome to Solutions.
864. Hello.
Hello. You have a question or comment for Dr. Edwards?
Yes, I do.
Lawrence, if you would cut your computer down, then you won't. You'll no longer hear that feedback in the background.
Okay.
That's better.
Okay, and your question, and you should be able to hear the answer through your telephone.
Oh, okay. Dr. Edwards, my question is about your 7 principles. I wanted to know if those principles will apply to elementary schools as well, knowing that dropouts, a student doesn't decide to drop out just overnight, and it's it's a process. Will these also apply for elementary as well?
Well, my belief is that they apply to any level, and you adapt or tweak them based on the level of the students and so on. But as you look at those 7 principles, I think they're relevant at any level. And as you stated, at early intervention, we go back to Principle 1. Early intervention starts pre-K. We know the value of children who participate in highly structured preschool programs and the benefit that has on their performance in school and the likelihood that they'll stay in school and do well in school. So, yes, they apply at all levels, and that they can be, not applied just to kids who are dropping out either. I mean, you look at this, you can look at these pieces and how do these ideas or concepts impact all kids? I mean, all children can benefit, because I think every child's at risk. They're just at different degrees of risk at different times in their life, in their school careers.
I agree. So in Principle 1, when you talk about early identification,
yes,
are you talking about when you say early identification, what do you mean there?
Okay, well, when I say early identification, I'm talking about within your own community. How do you identify kids who are potentially at risk? When do you see poor performance, whether it be academic, behavior, whatever, as a problem? When do you start looking at kids? How do you pre-assess kids? Your early screenings even with kindergarten registration, if we're talking elementary, what are we looking at? What do we look at kids even in the pre-K? We look at a family history. Do we have parents that completed school? I mean, if you know that the parents didn't complete school, what's the likelihood that child, what are we setting that child up for? So, but then, also looking at academic skills. What are those skills that are essential? Because I think there's a set of essential skills that all kids need to be able to do to be successful. We can look at some of our 21st century skills that kids need to be successful, and some other essential skills, for example, literacy, a key piece, and how are we ensuring that we're addressing those skills and embedding them into our curriculum and our school programs, so we don't have a situation where we just become so content-based. And I think that's really a critical piece.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm, sure. Bye.
Okay, remember our lines are open, toll free. Call 888-539-8859. If you're outside of the United States, you may call in 864-656-4552. And if you were one of the callers that had called in earlier and you were just on hold for too long, please call us back. We'll put you right on line, and we apologize for having you on hold for so long. Steve, one of the things, as I read your book, that struck me as interesting was that even though you were addressing the principal's role in dropout prevention with these 7 principles, it seemed also to me that these principles might apply to other people in the district, or certainly the superintendent, or any group planning to address the issue of dropouts. Are there any of these principles that can only be accomplished by the principal?
No, Sam, I don't think so. I would believe that they're applicable to, multiple levels. You could look at it, what I think it's very important to say, how do we take these 7 principles, look at them from a district perspective, community perspective, district perspective? How do we look at them at our individual schools? But as a classroom teacher, how do I look at them at, even at my grade level or department or in my classroom? What do I do? What's my level of accountability? I'll give you an example. You've got a child who's missed numerous days of school. Well, in many districts, here's what happens is they send out a form letter after 5 days, after 10 days, after 15 days, after 20 days, and they drop them. And, what about the teacher, the classroom teacher, calling, going to the kid's house, doing the kind of outreach that really demonstrates that you care? I mean, getting a form letter and saying that you've missed 5 days of school doesn't do a whole lot to motivate me to come back to school, because usually those letters say, well, if you miss X amount of more days, you're going to be withdrawn from school. So it's what can I do depending on where I sit in the organization, and what is my role, and what is the impact I can have.
Well, we have another caller from Decatur, Mississippi. Janine, you're on the air with Dr. Edwards. Can you share a comment or a question?
Thank you for your time. My question is, as far as knowing that a student is about to drop out of high school, maybe even middle school, what is your advice as far as putting together a team, a preventative team that can target this student?
So you're looking at, you said you've got a student who's like, they're on the verge of this packing it in, is what you're telling me.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, desperate times call for desperate measures. And see, what I think you have to do is you have to throw out everything that we say is the way we've done business. Well, they've got to get this many credits this quarter, or they've got to do this, or they've got to do that. So we have to step back and say, let's look at this through the child's lens. Based on what we know about this child, what could we do to help them be successful? And you've got to engage the child in that conversation. The child's got to be part of it. So let's say the child's in 7th grade, 8th grade, I don't know, whatever grade you choose. But, are they really successful in 2 classes a day? Well, let's see that they get in those 2 classes. Maybe they can be in that teacher's room a couple other periods a day. I worry about how many credits they got to have, how many Carnegie units, who are they connected to, who are they successful with, and what can we get as a foundation piece for that child. I also want to know what gets that kid up in the morning, if something gets them up in the morning. What motivates them? What are those things that they have a deep interest in, and how can we find a connection to that? Who else do they have connected to in the community? Because they only spend a small portion of their time in school when you really think about it. Are there other individuals in the community that we can engage in this process? So I think the most important thing is to do is get away from, well, the policy says this, the rule says that, the state says this. I guess probably I shouldn't be saying this publicly, but many times I really violated a lot of the rules, but the way the rules were set up, it wasn't going to work for that child, because no 2 kids are the same. So we have to step back and say, who needs to be at the table? That's school personnel. That's maybe potentially community personnel, whoever that child may be engaged with, probation officer, minister, scout leader, who knows, whoever it may be. And could we get those people engaged in the process and really put the full court press on this kid, but in a very good way, to say, well, how do we collectively meet this kid's needs based on what they are, based on what they're interested in, based on anything that we can grasp that they have success with.
Thank you. That's a great direction, and you answered the question. I think as far every team would be different, we would just specialize the team to the need of the student.
That's like it's like when you go to the doctor. If you go to different doctors for different reasons. So you've got to really specialize it and create a team of people and get second opinions. See, I think kids succeed when great minds don't think alike.
Exactly. Super. Thank you for your time. This is exciting. I appreciate your time.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Janine, for calling. We're getting some great questions, and we've got some more coming. Our next caller is from Dallas, Texas. Bill, you're on the air with Dr. Edwards.
Great. Thank you very much. I am a middle school teacher in an area that has a very high dropout rate. Our ninth grade cohort graduation rate here is about 44%. And we're trying to get to focus our own children onto their own futures. In other words, we have established in our middle school a 10-year archive, a time capsule that basically the children write letters for and then come back for in 10 years. And we're trying to get them to focus on their own futures. And it seems to be having a great effect. And I'm wondering if similar methods have been used with other dropout-prone populations to get them to think of their own future and hopefully stay in school.
Well, Bill, I this is an interesting approach, and it's a rhetorical question at this point, and because I'm always interested in what you use as evidence to say that this is making a difference, and that's by no means not critical of what you've said.
Oh, no.
I'm just trying to say, how do we know that makes a difference? Because whatever we put our time and energy into, we want it to be as purposeful as possible. And I think one of the biggest challenges, especially children in that age group, is to get them to look beyond today, tomorrow. If they're looking past the next 10 minutes in some cases, it's a huge challenge. Well, you know what I'm talking about, because, the more at risk you are, the less far they look out. And I think that the more, though, that we can connect things to them that has some future orientation, but that can relate to the present. And see, when you do that time capsule, who's it about?
It's about them.
Yes, Bill.
We have a 350-pound vault bolted to the floor in our school lobby under spotlight that the kids pass 4 times a day, and they realize it's about them.
Wow, geez, you could put a body in there.
We could. We put about.
You could put a body of past dropouts.
Right.
This is what happens to past dropouts. But no, I think that's the key. It's about them, and the more it's about them, when you're 13, 14, 15 years old, or what's it about? It's about you. You don't think about anybody else. So the more we can connect it to them and continue to, and I think the presence, the fact that it's right there in the lobby or wherever, it's a constant reminder. So I think about, some of the things that really resonate with me about what you've done is it's about them. It's in front of them all the time. They've participated in it. And hopefully 10 years from now, 10 years is a long time, but the fact that they're connected to it on a day-to-day basis, I think, is really important. And I think when you have programs that center around those themes, it's very important. I think too often we exclude the child from the process. And when we exclude the child from the process, if we tell them, well, in 10 years you need to be doing this, this, and this, then we're telling them what they need to do instead of letting them participate in it.
Right.
Well, so I really commend you. That sounds good.
Well, thank you. And the thing that makes me feel real good about it is the kids love it. I mean, we've been doing it for 3 years, and currently the junior class in our local high school has over 50 more students than last year. So something is helping move in the right direction.
Well, my only comment there would be to step back and say, get a few people together and say, what do we got going on here? Is it making a difference? Why is it making a difference? What's working? Talk to the kids, get their perceptions, their input, and say, why do you like this? What makes it good?
Actually, we've done that, and there's a survey online answering that question.
Oh, I'd love to see it. Where do you access that survey?
Studentmotivation.org.
I got you. I wrote it down. Thanks.
Fantastic. You're very welcome.
It's great to hear from you, Bill. Thank you for calling in.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And now we have another call who's been waiting for a few minutes, and that's Ann from Virginia. Ann, welcome to Solutions, and I'm sure you have some good questions or comments for Dr. Edwards. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to have this opportunity. I'm a big proponent of looking at the resiliency research, particularly school connectedness, and how we can look at those protective factors to help our students increase achievement. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on ways you think principals can design schools to increase student engagement, to keep those young folks attached, and to help build resiliency.
Sure. I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Ann.
Ann, now where in Virginia are you?
Petersburg, Virginia. It's about 30 miles down the road from Richmond.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I live in D.C. area, so.
Oh, okay.
So we're neighbors. Well, I think you've hit on a real important point, and looking at those the research on resiliency and that engagement piece is so important. I think one of the things, I go back to the policy piece that I think really negatively impacts all this. We have so many school districts that say, well, you can't have electronic devices, no MP3 players, no cell phones, no whatever. We're fighting a battle we can't win. Kids are using this type of technology, and it's going to continue to get better, and they're going to use more and more of it. So how do we take things that are of high interest and look at how kids learn and what they do on a day-to-day basis and how they interact with their peers is so important to engage them in the process. So how can we use things that they're already doing that are important to them and engage them in the process, whatever that may be? Another real important piece is that I think it goes back to the relationship piece. And, if you ever looked at any of the work of Bill Daggett, Bill Daggett talks about the 3 R's: rigor, relevance, and relationships. And he represents it in a Venn diagram where the three overlap. He talks about personalized learning. And I take a little different approach to that. I really think the relationship piece is the baseline, and how do we extend ourselves to meet the needs of a kid? I was talking to a middle school principal yesterday, and he says, 1 minute the kid, you're having this adult conversation with the 7th grader, and the next minute she's skipping down the hall humming the Barney song or something. And that's a middle school kid, so you need to understand that. And so understanding the dynamics of the kids developmentally at each stage. Now, what are the dynamics of a 5-year-old in school? What are the dynamics of the 18-year-old? And what are those things that are of interest to them? So you get that relationship piece, but then it's got to be relevant. If it's not relevant to them, then it's not going to be very meaningful. They're not going to engage in the process. So we have to engage them and look at finding things that are really get them pumped up and excited and working on it. I can give my example. One of my children, one of my 3rd grader, the project he's been most interested in this year was he did a diorama where it was on the Arctic tundra, and he got all fired up about this. It was hands-on. He built it. He did the research on the computer. He was so engaged and so excited because it was something that was of interest to him. And when we have that and they have a relationship with the adult, and you know what, the relationship piece, sometimes I think we miss the boat on that, because the relationship piece, it's about how we create that relationship. We've got to foster that relationship. We've got to build it. We can't expect them to come to us. And if we've had, if the relationship has gone sour because of maybe something we held a child accountable to, then we have to rebuild it. I'm not talking about being buddy-buddy with a child. Kids used to say, Dr. Edwards, you're picking on me. I said, that's right. I'm going to continue to pick on you until you know what you need to do, what you need to do. I think it's the highest form of caring. But there's a formula that's E plus R equals O, events plus response equals outcomes. Things are going to happen in kids' lives. How we respond will determine the outcome.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your answer.
Thank you, Ann.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, Ann, for calling. Steve, this reminded me of the first time I ever met you, and that was in Baltimore when you did a presentation at our conference there. And I noticed that you wrote about the same thing. The thing that impressed me then impressed me in the book as well, and it was the 5 for 5. Could you share with our listeners about that? I mean, truly a wonderful way to personalize a school.
Well, just something that I did as a principal, and I think the important thing is you decide what you're going to do, and then you got to do it to nauseam almost. I mean, it has to be that redundant. But what I would do is meet with 5 kids every day for no particular reason. They get each kid would get a 10-minute meeting with me, and I'd sit and talk to them. People say, "What did you ask?" I'm like, "How's school going? You know, how are your teachers? You know, what are your favorite classes? What do you do outside of school? You know, do you have brothers or sisters? You know," and as you get to converse with these kids, you get to develop a relationship with them. And 5 kids a day is 25 a week times 40 weeks is 1,000 kids. I had 4 assistant principals. My requirement was they would do the same. And at first they didn't like it because they said I got too many other things to do. But the value of that is incredible. So in theory, with the 5 of us doing it, that's 5,000 kids a year that you've met with. And then you ask your teachers to say, would you meet with 1 child a week? And this is a child that you have no other reason to meet with them. You're not meeting with them because, there's a discipline problem, or they didn't do their homework, or whatever it may be. It's because I just want to sit and talk to you, and you let them talk.
Yeah, a good proactive way to establish a positive relationship with a kid. I think Sam had something he wanted to ask.
I do, but I want to remind listeners the toll-free number again is 888-539-8859, and there's still time to get your questions in. Steve, you weren't able to cover in a lot of detail the pyramid of intervention that you mentioned that is in your book. Often this whole problem of dropout seems insurmountable, really, to many school people. There's so many things to do, and yet I think the pyramid of intervention really puts some structure to the kind of interventions that are required. I think your 80% rule, that 80% of the kids really need very little or not a lot in the way of intervention, and then it moves on up to more stringent interventions. Would you comment a little more about that?
Sure, and I think it relates to a couple key pieces. One, pyramid intervention, although we were doing this before the concept of professional learning communities became popular in the late 80s and is very popular today, it really is grounded in a lot of that thinking, that professional learning community thinking. And what do we do when kids aren't successful? And now when you think about RTI, response intervention, which is a federal mandate out of through IDEA legislation, schools are required to have, in many cases they look like 3-tier models for addressing or providing interventions for kids who are not successful. But I look at that pyramid at multiple levels, where at the base of the pyramid are initiatives that we have for all kids. And we have to look at them and say, are they working? Do they make sense? Do they meet the needs of our kids? Then if kids aren't being successful at that level, then we look, what's that next tier of intervention, which is more of an intermediate tier, which could be usually are things that are involving in-house interventions, things that we do in school. And then at the top is our most vulnerable kids, and I say 5%. The percentages could vary, of course, sure. But it's important to know that then these are interventions that we engage, other agencies likely, and other resources to help that child be successful. But as you go up the pyramid, of course, you have fewer kids, and those interventions become more intense. And as one of our callers asked the question about, who do you have at the table for this individualized plan and so on, that's where you get to the top. All the rules are thrown out, and you say, okay, what do we need to do? How do we roll up our sleeves and be as creative as possible? That's why I say there's really never any top to the pyramid.
Yeah, and you also identify, I think in your first principle, the whole idea of identifying students early, and that is, and you make an excellent case for that, and that's something also that at the National Dropout Prevention Center we advocate around the country, and there are many efforts underway now, more than ever, really, by researchers and commercial enterprises to develop dropout early warning systems, or commonly known as DOs. What is your thinking about whether or not schools and school districts can develop these dropout early warning systems on their own, or do you think this is something that requires outside expertise?
Well, if you have the resources for outside expertise, I know that can be very helpful. And of course, Sam, your agency, National Dropout Prevention Center is a great place to go for resources. And I'm always sharing with people the importance of being part of that group and adding to being part of that network. But I think there are also things that you need, as I said early on, to look at your own community. What are the unique aspects of your community that you need to be taking a look at? And, as we talk about those risk factors or resiliency factors for kids, we can find a lot of this information out, through multiple resources, but taking it and personalizing it and tweaking it for your community, I think, is essentially important. And I think if you get a group of people together within your school or community, you can take some of the research that's out there and you can begin to design your own model for assessing kids who are going to be most vulnerable. I think the danger is, we just assume that a certain kid's going to be vulnerable because it's based purely on perception.
Exactly.
And we don't always take the time to look deeper. And I think that a lot of times kids, if you're not a behavioral problem, you easily slip through the cracks. Because, if you're not driving the teacher crazy and you're not creating a lot of problems, even if you're not showing up, you're often overlooked, even if you have poor grades.
Right.
Because the child who's the real behavior problem is the one who gets the attention.
Exactly.
And I think then these other kids, what happens is we wait. Then this is a kid all of a sudden go, oh, wow, the kid's in 11th grade and he's got 2 credits.
True.
Yeah.
But he's such a nice kid.
Yeah.
But he comes, eats lunch every day, he walks his girlfriend to class, but that's about it. And then eventually he says, I'm 19, I think I'll do something else.
Yeah. Oh, wait, we've got some more callers, Steve, for you.
Good.
Let's go to Mary in Washington, D.C. Mary, you're on the air with Dr. Edwards.
Hi, Dr. Edwards. How are you?
Mary, do I know this Mary?
You do know this, Mary. I have a quick question for you. I'm in an alternative school in the district, and so our students come to us from anywhere from 25 days to 180 days. They come to us with all sorts of problems, mainly dropout. What can we do to make an immediate impact on them before they go back and transition back to their home schools to kind of engage them back into education?
Well, Mary, why would they only be there 25 days? Who would determine they'd leave on the 25th day or 26th day?
They're suspensions or expulsions.
Oh, okay, I see. All right. So, I think the key is that in that, the shorter amount of time, obviously, that the more of a challenge, the more in depth the program needs to be. But I think that you need to be able to give them a security blanket.
Okay.
And that security blanket is that we're going to follow up with you. We're going to check on you. Just think if this kid goes back after 50 days in your program and you stop in and see him. You go over to the school. You go take them to lunch during the day. In school, you do whatever. You have this further follow-up. We put a school within a school program in our school. And one of the key pieces is kids transition out of that program. We always kept a liaison from that program involved in that child's life. So they became the advocate for that child. I like the term advocate, mentor, because I think that we really need adults in the system to be advocates for these kids, because so often they have no one else advocating for them. My kid gets in trouble in school, has a problem, I'm there, I'm all over it, I'm the advocate. Many of these kids don't have that. So you become more than just looking at this kid for 25 days, but you're also, I think, almost like become a case manager for this kid. And how do we strategically follow up and begin to help link other resources for this child so they can be successful?
Okay. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mary, for calling in. We have another call from that area. Susan from Virginia. You're on the air with Dr. Edwards.
Hi, Dr. Edwards. How are you?
Good, Susan. How are you?
Good. Listen, I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about addressing barriers like teachers that believe that kids should be failing or that certain kids are not reachable, and if they drop out, it actually makes the schools better. How do you go about addressing those kind of barriers?
I usually buy them a program called Selling Real Estate with No Money Down and encourage them to go into that profession. No. Here's what I really think is important. We had this conversation today. It's interesting you asked this question because I like to do some work with staff about what are your core values? What are your core beliefs? What do you really believe? You know, and teachers are, you know, people are going to say, oh, yeah, I care about kids. Kids are most important. All kids can learn, blah, 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 blah. But when you see, for example, a teacher with a high failure rate, you know, you get 50% of your kids failing. Well, if you told me your core beliefs are this, how do I see evidence of that in your classroom? What does it look like in your classroom? If this is what you tell me you believe, now if you don't believe that kids can be successful or whatever, then we got to go back a few steps because we say, you know, then maybe this isn't the right place for you because these are our core beliefs. And I think when you're hiring people and bringing people into your school, you really need to identify and have a conversation about what are core beliefs. And this is what you really believe. If you really believe this, then give me an example of what it looks like in your classroom. Give me an example of a child who's not succeeding in your classroom, and what do you do about it? What actions do you take? Mm-hmm. See, what happens too often is somebody comes to the principal's office and say, here's the referral. I never want him back in my class. Mm. Well, where do you want me to put him? You know? Mm-hmm. You know, what? And see, again, that's not the failing of the child. For me, it's the failing of the adult.
So is that up to the leadership to address that barrier, or are there things as teachers we can do to try to minimize that?
Well, I think it's, you know, are you part of a team, a teaching team?
Yes.
Okay, on your team. I think it's, you know, sometime in your team, you know, as a team, you know, you may raise a question. I think it's a great way to do it. Then you're not telling people what to do or what to believe. You're raising questions. You know, what do we truly believe as a team? What are our core beliefs about education, about kids? And people are going to say all the right answers and say, well, how is that reflected in our team? Do we really practice that as a team? And then name a student. What about Bobby here? Are we really fulfilling those core values? Are we meeting those? Are we practicing those with Bobby? You know, because he's failing and, you know, in this, that, and the other thing. So I really think it gets back to discussion, what your core beliefs are, and then do we really practice those? And if we're not, why aren't we? Or are those core values only for the kids who succeed? See, it's like you know, a doctor saying, I only deal with healthy people. You know, if you're sick, why'd you come here? You're sick. I only deal with healthy people. I mean, it's ludicrous, right?
Right.
But it's like a teacher saying, well, I only deal with you if you have all your ducks in a row. If everything you do, you know, then I'm a great teacher. I mean, really, the craft of teaching, the art of teaching is how do we deal with those most vulnerable kids?
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Edwards.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan. We're going to try to fit in a couple more calls. Paul from Salt Lake City, Utah. Welcome to Solutions.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Edwards, for taking my call. I work in District Student Services Office, and we are grappling with this very idea of the tier system, trying to renew ourselves, trying to see if we can impact kids in the schools a little bit better. Do you have any suggestions of how we could coordinate the efforts of all the people in our department? We have people in truancy. We have somebody who's a community of caring. We have somebody who's working in classrooms in the schools that help at-risk kids. But we all seem to be in our own little silos. Do you have any suggestions for how we could? You mentioned earlier a growth plan for students. Would that be something that could help us coordinate our efforts so we can bring all the services to bear for a kid at one time?
Well, here's one thing I would start to do, Paul, is say, what if you probably each have different children you work with, correct?
Well, sometimes there's an overlap.
We
don't even, half the time we don't know who those children are.
Well, I think that's the starting point. It's the overlap part. If we were to come together and say, let's talk about our caseloads. Here are the kids that we service. Let's see where there's some overlap with these kids. I bet you're going to find some kids who are on multiple lists. What are we doing? What are we doing with Mary here? You know, we got Mary. She's on 4 lists. You got her. We got her. What services are we each providing to her? how could we collaborate to better meet her needs? Then you've got a starting point and a focal point. And I think then you say, well, geez, here's what we're doing with Mary. How could we then begin to talk about where else we could collaborate with these people or around these kids? How do we, I'm big on having even office space in the schools. Like I said, I gave a couple examples of that. But I think you have to start from some common ground, and that common ground would be a child. Let's talk about a specific child that's on your list, on my list, on his list, on her list, and what are we doing with them? What's working with you? How could we share resources? How could we collaborate around that child? And if you keep the child at the center of the conversation, you significantly reduce the turf war issue. And the better you develop relations with people, I think you have really greater levels of trust and reduce that. But I'd start from, where you have some of that overlap, if you can.
Right. Very good idea. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Paul. We have one more call. Ray from Iowa. Welcome to Solutions, Ray.
Hello.
I think I know this voice.
Do you?
Yes, I do. And
that's good.
Yes, and we're going to let you ask your question, Ray, but we're going to point out to our listeners that they'll hear more of this voice in a month. We're going to talk about that in a little while. But Ray, go at Dr. Edwards with your question, please.
Hi, Dr. Edwards.
Hi, Ray.
I was reading your book, got through it, and was real interested in it, and congratulate you for speaking up as a principal. I got looking at things in there, and I noticed you had mentioned alternatives and options, but you didn't say much about alternative schools or other options. I was kind of wondering about your viewpoint about implementing alternative schools in your paradigm there for how to go about dropout prevention. So I'd just like to hear some comments about your opinions about alternative schools.
Sure, Ray, thanks. And when you've got a 15,000-word monograph, it's, as I was telling Marty and Sam, I said, when you finish that, you're ready to do the next edition.
Right.
But I'm a big proponent of options and alternatives. And if you look at that pyramid of intervention in the book, and it probably doesn't explain it very well, but at the top are really some alternatives. We had a school within a school, and we also set up some alternative programs around students' needs. We ran one program, a 4-hour session in the morning, 4-hour in the afternoon, 4-hour in the evening. And I'm talking about students who are really, really struggling, but it's whatever we can capture. So the key for me with the alternative programs is they don't become, this is too often to become a dumping ground.
Right.
And I feel that as a principal, I oversaw my own alternative programs. I didn't want programs that I shipped some kid out to and now, they're gone. Who can I get in there next? But they're programs that become part of our school program. They're an extension of our school program. The biggest thing for my kids who went into some of the alternative programs that we had and we ran and we oversaw was, can I go to the prom? Do I get to walk across the stage with the other kids? You got the same diploma. You walk across the stage. You get to go to the prom. You get to participate in programs. So it's not making them like, you're going to a leper colony, that you've got some dreaded disease or something, that you're still a part of the school. We just see that. I think the biggest problem we have is we expect everybody to do it the exact same way. And if you don't, there's something wrong with you. If you don't start school at age 5 and finish at 17 or 18 and go kindergarten through 1 through 12, there must be something wrong with you. And we've got to get past that stigma. We used to sit with kids and say, okay, what we have isn't working. So, based on this, it's not working. How can we collectively brainstorm and say, come up with something that's going to meet your needs? So, let's talk about where you've been successful. What are some things that have worked for you? Talk about experiences, teachers you've worked with that you've had success with, so on. Interest. Now, let's design a program around that, because many of the alternative programs were very, very, very individualized. So I'm a strong proponent of that, but I think it's got to be very, very personalized, and it's got to be connected to, I thought it was critical, it's connected to the school, not something separate. It's not a district alternative program where each school gets X amount of slots, because then it's easier to say, oh yeah, here's where we ship them, and then I'm done with them. Then then the people who look at it from that perspective see it as their challenge is to make sure that kid doesn't get back in my building.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying, right?
It's the ownership issue, yeah.
Yes, it is. You're right. I agree with you.
I'm glad you mentioned looking at the programs as an extension of the school. And you mentioned school within a school or whatever, but not necessarily separate schools.
Right.
What's your impression there? Is it the same extension of the school?
I think they have to be an extension of the school. I think there has to be a link, because if there's, link for many reasons. We need to maintain the integrity of the programs. If we're offering a language arts class in the alternative program, then they've got to be linked to our language arts teachers at the school. They've got to be all part of that department. They've got to be using that curriculum. There's got to be those connections, so we maintain the integrity of our curriculum and of our programs. But many of my kids in alternative programs, we had intensive counseling programs. I thought that was critical. I thought community service was a key piece, because many of our kids in this alternative program I'm specifically talking about were involved in the criminal justice system. So, we had a judge came in and worked with us, and he was just a great guy. And I said, what I want when that kid goes in front of a judge, we're able to say that they're in an academic program, they're getting counseling services, and they're contributing to the community, either through a job or giving back to the community through volunteer services or whatever it may be. So I think it's got to be, these programs have to all be under the same umbrella.
Well, thanks for calling, Ray. I'm hating to interrupt, but one of the wonderful things about being on the web is we don't have to stop exactly at 4:30, but we have extended and taken advantage of Dr. Edwards a little bit longer than we asked him for, and we appreciate your call and the call of all the others, and sorry that we couldn't get to all those who called in earlier and had to wait and missed out. But we've made a start, and we know there's lots more to learn about the principal's role in dropout prevention, and there's lots of this information on our website, and as far as the resources and the monograph to continue learning about this. Don't you think, Sam?
I do, Marty. And Steve, we want to thank you for coming online with us today and giving of your time. We'll certainly be waiting for the next edition. We think we have a star in the making here, as a matter of fact. This is not the Oprah show, but we're going to replace Dr. Phil with Dr. Steve.
Okay, well, keep the checks coming.
I want to thank all of our listeners also. We hope this has been informative for you, and I want you to remember, please, that all of these radio webcasts will be archived, so you can go back and listen again and catch up on what you didn't hear, didn't take notes on, or want to hear more about. And recommend these to friends and colleagues who were not able to listen in this afternoon. They can be used also for professional development activities. So we'll have those up on the web along with all those other resources.
And we want to remind you, our listeners, that these radio webcasts will be broadcast monthly on the fourth Tuesday of each month at 3:30 Eastern Time live. You check our webpage for the exact dates and the content of each broadcast. Now, interestingly, our last caller is our next featured presenter, Dr. Ray Morley, who is a national leader in alternative education, that's his question, and dropout prevention. He will be discussing personalization, which, as he described this to me today, is changing the paradigm from looking at the curriculum first to looking at the child first. So we're looking forward to that discussion with Dr. Morley next month. I think that, yes, it will be Tuesday, March 25th at 3:30. So information about Dr. Morley and his resources will be up 2 weeks before the next program. So check the website for that, and then tune in again on March 25th.
So we hope to see you again at that time. Let us know how this format worked for you, and also please make suggestions and comments on future topics for solutions. We know why students are dropping out of school, and with research-based solutions, we can assure that our students graduate. So join us next time for more solutions to the dropout crisis.